Imam Ahmad says on the next day, the third day, I felt in my heart that something's going to happen today. Something's definitely going to happen. And so I asked the guards to go in the morning of the third day. I asked them to go get a string, because I was afraid that if I would be whipped and if I fell unconscious, then my pants would fall. And so I asked them to get a string so I could tie my pants, tighter, so that my pants wouldn't fall if I lost consciousness. So he says I did that. Then he said they took me to the palace. And today when I came to the palace, I saw everything change. And definitely it was a different day today. He said, I saw people who had weapons. I saw people who had swords. I saw people, who had whips in their hands. I saw scores of troops all around the palace, outside and inside. Everywhere I saw troops. And outside I saw that there's a huge amount of people who gathered. But before anything happened, before the interrogation began, before the hearings began, he said, the Khalifa sent 2 messengers to me. And these 2 messengers, they came up to me and they said, get a grip of yourself. Understand what's going on. The Khalifa is worried about you, just like he would be worried about his son. They were trying to tell him that, change your mind before it's too late. Go a little easy. Imam Ahmad again, his famous statement, أعطوني شيئا من كتاب الله عز وجل أو سنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Give me something from the book of Allah Azza wa Jal or the sunnah of the messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. One of the people who was there as an eyewitness on that day, he was a government worker. He says, his name was Ahmad Ibn al-Faraj. He says that I was going into work on that day and I noticed that there were a lot of people and they had all closed down their shops and they had grabbed their weapons. And so he says, I began wondering, and certainly today, Baghdad was a different place. The world in Baghdad had totally changed today. And everyone was concerned about Imam Ahmad. People were talking about Imam Ahmad. And people were ready to give up their lives and to sacrifice whatever they had to sacrifice just so Imam Ahmad could live. So he says that I saw that the Khalifa also noticed there's a lot of people gathered everywhere and there were crowds forming. And so he asked his troops, and there were armed troops, to be around the palace and so on. The people were just amazed to see the courage of this great Imam. And he said, I went up to some of the people in the crowd just to ask them to make sure why they had gathered. So he says, when I asked them why they had all gathered, they said, today Imam Ahmad is going to be tested because of the Quran. Today Imam Ahmad is going to be tested because of the Quran. So he said, I went to one of the guards at the palace and I asked them to let me in so I can go right to the front row there to see exactly what happened. He says, I got to the front row, and there, just as I got there, the hearing began with Imam Ahmad. And Imam Ahmad had not arrived, but the Khalifa had arrived, and the Khalifa said real loud, where is this man who says that Allah talks, that Allah speaks? Where is this man? And where is this man who has said that Allah, Allah has a tongue and Allah has a mouth to speak with? Of course, Imam Ahmad never said anything of the kind. All Imam Ahmad said was, Allah speaks. He didn't say that he needs a tongue like human beings and he needs a mouth like human beings, because there's nothing like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this is something that the Khalifa himself added. So soon Imam Ahmad was brought in. And Imam Ahmad, when he was brought in, next day, he was brought in with his jail shirt. It was a different shirt that they had put on him, and they had a hood on his head. It may sound familiar to some of the things going on today. So they put a hood on his head. And so he came in and he didn't see the people. But he heard everything that was going around and how the people were whispering, and he felt, that definitely today was a very serious day. And so they brought him and they put him in front of the Khalifa, and Imam Ahmad put one hand over the other, and he said, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There's no movement nor strength save through Allah. And Imam Ahmad, after saying this, he began listening. And in the meanwhile, the crowds outside, they were gathering more and more. In the meanwhile, the crowds outside were gathering more and more. People were wondering what's going on. Imam Ahmad says the dialogue began. And Mu'tasim began asking him, so you are Ahmad Ibn Hanbal? And Imam Ahmad said, I am Ahmad Ibn Muhammad Ibn Hanbal. So he said, you're the one who, I understand you're the one who's saying that Allah talks and Allah speaks and the Quran is not created. Where did you get all of this? So Imam Ahmad said, I got it from the book of Allah. He said, where did you read it in the book of Allah? So Imam Ahmad said, there are plenty of places. He said, like what? So he told him again, وَلَكِنْ حَقَّ الْقَوْلُ مِنِّي. He quoted a verse from the Quran, from Surah Al-Sajdah. He said, وَلَكِنْ حَقَّ الْقَوْلُ مِنِّي لَأَمْلَأَنَّ جَهَنَّمَ مِنَ الْجِنَّةِ وَالنَّاسِ أَجْمَعِينَ. That my word is going to come true. The speech of Allah is going to come true. When He said that I'm going to fill the hellfire with jinn and mankind. So Imam Ahmad said, this is what Allah says. Do you think there's somebody other than Allah who has said this? Mu'tasim again was totally dumbfounded. So he turned to his scholars who were there, like Bishr al-Marisi and Ibn al-Zayyat and Ahmad Ibn Abi Du'ad, and he asked them, Nadhiru, debate him, say something to him. But all the other scholars who were there, they had all had their turns to debate Imam Ahmad, and they were all frustrated. And so their only reaction now, because they were so frustrated, they couldn't defeat Imam Ahmad because of his incredible proofs from the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They could not defeat him. They could not overcome his arguments. So they only had one reaction, and they said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, uqtul. Oh, leader of the believers, kill him. Kill him. Mu'tasim got up immediately, and he went right in front of Imam Ahmad, who had the hood on him, and he didn't know what was going to happen. And Mu'tasim reared back with his hand, all the way back, and he brought his hand to slap Imam Ahmad on his face. And he slapped him so hard that Imam Ahmad fell on the ground, unconscious. He did not move, Imam Ahmad. When this happened, some of the troops who were there, they were from Khurasan. They were the friends of Hanbal, the grandfather of Imam Ahmad Ibn Hanbal. They immediately got up and they left. Mu'tasim was surprised that what happened. Mu'tasim was now afraid that now, because of Imam Ahmad, there's going to be a revolution among his ranks. Some of his people had already begun to leave. And so immediately he told the guards who were there, he told them, bring some water and sprinkle him with water, put water on him, to bring him back into consciousness. So they took off the hood and they were putting water on him. And they put many buckets of water on him. Finally, Imam Ahmad regained consciousness. When he regained consciousness, he saw that his uncle, Ishaq ibn Hanbal, the uncle of Imam Ahmad, was in front of him, and in front of his uncle was the Khalifa, Mu'tasim. And his uncle was begging him to let Imam Ahmad go. You see, his uncle also had succumbed. His uncle had also begun to say that the Quran was created. He had yielded. He had capitulated to the Khalifa, and he had given in. But he was pleading on behalf of Imam Ahmad. So Imam Ahmad, he was on the ground. He looked up at his uncle and he began talking to his uncle and ignored the Khalifa totally, boldly ignored the Khalifa. And he said, the one who threw all this water on me, it looks like he's a little bit upset. I mean, look at the presence of mind that Imam Ahmad had. He said, it looks like he's a little bit upset. And he was purposely saying this to anger the Khalifa. As if to say that, look, we've been talking like human beings, just are debating with each other, and now you're going to hit me? just because of the arguments from the Quran and the Sunnah? Is that something that's right? Is that something that's just? So the Khalifa, he got very upset. And he said, you don't think that I know what you're trying to do? Meaning that you're trying to, talk down to me? So at that point, some of the other people who were there, they said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, uqtulhu hatta nastariha min. Oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, go ahead and kill him so that we will be relieved of his presence. We'll get rid of him forever. So Mu'tasim, the Khalifa, he said, I made a promise to Allah that I'm not going to kill him by the sword. And I'm not going to tell anybody to kill him by the sword. Instead, I'm going to do something else. So the other scholars who were there, they said, okay, use the whip. So he said, I swear that I'm going to use this whip, and I'm not going to stop whipping him until he says that the Quran is created, until he says what I'm saying. And so the punishment began. Imam Ahmad says that they dragged me on my face, and they took me between these two huge planks of wood and they tied me up. And then they called these big huge men who were going to whip me. And one of them brought forward a whip to Mu'tasim to show him what the whip looked like. Mu'tasim didn't like the whips. He asked for another stronger, bigger whip. And so that whip was brought in front of him. Then Mu'tasim ordered the first one who's going to strike Imam Ahmad. And he's all tied up. No. He said to him, come close to me. So that man, he came close to Mu'tasim and he said, Awji'. Hit him as hard as you can and give him as much pain as you can give him. So the man, and there was a whole line of these strikers or these whippers, you could say. There's a whole huge line of them. 20, 30 of them. So the first one went up and he whipped Imam Ahmad as hard as he could. Twice. Mu'tasim said, stop. Then he told him to step aside, and he asked the second one to come up and then whip him. Because you see, Mu'tasim did not want any of those whippers to get tired. So he wanted to give him his full strength when he whipped Imam Ahmad. So the first one came, and then the second one came, and the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, the sixth one, and all the entire line of these people, they came and they whipped Imam Ahmad. The people were watching. There were people outside. Mu'tasim was getting angrier by the minute, and the scholars, they were also getting very mad because Imam Ahmad still was holding strong. One of the men, he yelled out that, look, the Khalifa is standing in front of you, your Amir al-Mu'mineen is standing in front of you. You should obey him. Mu'tasim, he came down from his seat and he came to Imam Ahmad, tied between the two planks of wood. And he took out his sword. And from the other end of the sword, the handle of the sword, he picked it up and he started beating Imam Ahmad with the metal handle of the sword. Imam Ahmad was hurting all over. He had already been whipped more than 60 times. And here the Khalifa is now hitting him with the hard handle of his sword.